creek or pleasant vista, just an honest-to-goodness country view. Keep in mind, England is only slightly bigger than Pennsylvania in land area, and it has 4 times as many people. Clearly, somebody did something right. And I discovered something else here. Remember Wyomissing, where I was born? Wyomissing has always been a model for me of the ideal community. Well, it turns out Wyomissing was designed after this town, just 30 miles north of London, Letchworth Garden City. Back in the frontier days, when the U.S. government was giving away land in the West, it probably seemed to most Americans that we'd never run out of space. In England, by contrast, there hadn't been any free land for centuries. The cities were getting crowded and polluted, and there was no place to escape. In 1898, a visionary Englishman named Ebenezer Howard proposed dealing with this problem by building small satellite cities in the countryside, called garden cities, that would allow people to live and work in lush, leafy neighborhoods immediately surrounded by large areas of open space. Letchworth was the first garden city. Today, Letchworth has 33,000 residents and 14,000 jobs, plus schools, churches, and parks, all within walking distance of each other, and all surrounded by a permanently protected expanse of open country called a greenbelt, which residents are free to enjoy. The nearby garden city of Welland is designed around a green central square surrounded by shops and anchored by a large mall. On the inside, the mall looks like any American Galleria, but shoppers can walk to this mall, and much of the parking is underground. The English have firmly embraced Ebenezer Howard's ideal of carefully planned towns. After the Second World War, instead of scattering development at random all over the countryside as we did, the English continued their tradition of building self-contained towns connected to larger cities by public transportation and surrounded by permanently protected open space. Historic cities, like Bath, have also been surrounded by greenbelts to keep them from sprawling into the countryside. Nearly 60% of all new housing built in England is built on recycled land, like this former industrial tract outside of London. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is England. America is the land of large lots and lavish lawns. And besides, we don't want government telling us where to live. But the fact is, until the 1950s, most Americans did live in cities and towns, in close-knit neighborhoods like this one in Letchworth. It wasn't until big government came along, with everything from highway subsidies to zoning regulations, that sprawl became the law of the land. But now, there are actually places in America that have succeeded in changing such laws. This is the Willamette Valley, which stretches south of Portland, Oregon, one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the United States. I'm with Hector McPherson, whose family has farmed this land since the 1920s.
We have what is the Peoria Road, which is a road that leads directly to Corvallis, about 6 or 7 miles away, and people were leaking out and buying small tracts of land along that. This was simply development right along the major road of that area. Mm-hmm. But then we also saw there were certain actual subdivisions way out beyond any possible city services that were moving in to take up the land and to move out not just 1 or 2, but en masse. And, this was the kind of thing that I feared. And there was no breaks. There was nothing in Lynn County that I could turn to help me. There was absolutely no planning or zoning, no construction controls, no anything in the county.
A few years later, McPherson won a seat in the state Senate.
When I got there, I found that I knew more about land use planning than most of my contemporary senators and representatives. And so at that point, I decided that it was time for me to put together legislation which would help cure the problems that I saw in Oregon.
Thanks to this legislation, 25 million acres of land in Oregon are now zoned exclusively for farming and forestry.
And the whole purpose of the land use planning that I believe in is to simply make the best choices. And that's what we're trying to do here, is to make the best choices. We have to allow room for people, but they can't just go anywhere in Oregon and expect to be able to buy a bare piece of land and build a house.
Oregon's main planning tool is the growth boundary. Cities and counties in Oregon work together to draw boundaries around their traditional cities and towns. They allow enough room for all foreseeable growth for 20 years. Then they say, that's it. We'll talk again in 10 years. Inside this line, development is given the red carpet treatment. Outside, it's heavily restricted. To see the impact this has had, compare Metro Portland with Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. Portland has the same number of people, but living on half the land area.
We've achieved the livability, and that's a word I should get in here and emphasize. Livability is the key word in Oregon, and we want to have livability above all else. But I had, of course, a specific thing that I was trying to save farmland, and that came out very strongly in the legislation that we have.
The remarkable thing is, Oregon's land use law, initially designed to protect the countryside, has made Oregon cities among the healthiest in the nation. Metro Portland is thriving. Instead of development continually pushing outward, eroding the economic base of the center, abandoned land in the city is being recycled. Instead of government pouring money into new highways to keep up with sprawl, it's invested in new light rail lines, which also helps keep the downtown from being clogged with cars. Living in the city doesn't have to mean townhouses and apartments. Most residents of Metro Portland live in single-family detached houses with private backyards. In the 25 years since McPherson's bill has passed, residents and even developers have come to wholeheartedly support it. Oregonians prefer to live close to the outdoors and enjoy it whole, rather than carving it up for suburban sprawl. This is Charlotte, North Carolina, another rapidly growing metropolitan area. David Walters, a professor at the University of North Carolina here, was asked by several towns in the Charlotte region, such as Davidson, how they could plan their growth to create real communities instead of sprawl. Walters is English, so he turned to England's Garden Cities for inspiration.
And we began by identifying the floodplains, the steep slopes, areas that you couldn't build, and then we moved on to choose areas of particular scenic beauty, along highways and so forth, that were particularly valued by the community and which they wanted to preserve. Then we linked these with greenways and parks and ball fields and made a series of green edges to neighborhoods so that the edges were defined by the natural landscape. Then what happened was that this map became the basis for the official zoning maps that the towns adopted, and the design standards in this design became integrated with the design standards in their zoning ordinances.
So far, 6 towns in the Charlotte area have adopted new zoning ordinances to promote the development of traditional neighborhoods.
Well, interestingly enough, one of the main catalysts in this whole process was a big residential developer here that at one of our countless public meetings, he stood up and said, now why don't you all just make a complete build-out plan for the whole community, just like towns used to do. That way everybody will know what the rules are.
One of the things from a developer standpoint makes it attractive is that in one neighborhood, you really have 5 or 6 combined. You can also sell commercial property. We have our restaurant sites, our tavern sites, and we have several sites here to build little neighborhood office buildings. So I can be a commercial developer, a affordable housing developer, a high-end developer, all in one spot. It's really become more of a quest than building a development. It's really trying to build something that people can enjoy, that people can I always look at it where people go on vacation, they go to places like Savannah or Charleston, they go for a walkable neighborhood, and my feeling is you can have that kind of neighborhood and live in it every day. You don't have to be a tourist going to these type of older neighborhoods that have survived.